Okay, everybody see this okay? All right, awesome. So welcome back to the third session of the Advocacy Chapter Organizing School. We're over halfway there, folks. Today is going to be a really exciting conversation and practice today, because we're going to dive into what really is the fundamental skill of organizing. Whether you are doing organizing in an advocacy chapter, whether you are a union, whether you are doing political organizing, whether you are trying to, I don't know, foment some kind of revolution, I don't know, whatever it is you're trying to do. Organizing really fundamentally comes down to having conversations with other people. And as a skill to that kind of organizing that maybe you've done in the past, and if you have done this in the past, if you've heard of this, it's always good to practice. And if you're new to this, don't worry, you'll only be on the spot and potentially be embarrassed for a little while, because we're all going to have a chance to practice this today. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and training. I am, as you all know, I'm Mike McGee, organizer. Hopefully you know me by now. There's my email. And I am joined today, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Sean Fields. Sean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Fields. Like Mike mentioned in the slide shows, I'm the Western lead organizer with AEP National. I came out of the grad labor union movement, and I most recently came from working with your colleagues at Oregon State University. So I'm excited to be here and to share my experiences with organizing conversations and help you all organize on your campus.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And I'm really excited to have Sean here today. She has a lot of experience and a great perspective, and is currently working with a lot of faculty in the Southwest of the country, which I know is it's the Wild West out there. So let's get started. So today's agenda, we're going to first do a bit of review on your homework assignment, which I hope you all came with having done or at least attempted to complete it. And we're going to talk about how that process went. And then when we wrap up today, by the time we wrap up today, it will be clear why I had you do that, because as preview, you're going to walk away from today's meeting with another assignment to follow up with those people, but we'll talk more about that later. We're then going to dive into, what really is an organizing conversation? Why should we do it? What makes it distinct from just any old conversation? Because it is very distinct, and there's a skill to it, and there's a method to it that takes time and practice to learn. We're going to go over the 7-step model. Now, there's many ways to hold an organizing conversation, but I think no matter who you talk to, they will present some version of this model. Some people make it 6 steps, some people make it 8 steps, right? But I'm going to present what I think is the best way to go through, which is a 7-step model. And then we're going to spend a bulk of today's session doing an organizing conversation. I'm going to provide you all with a role play scenario. So when we get to that point, I'm going to post it in the chat like we've done before. You're going to go into breakout rooms, and you're all going to have a chance to be organizers, right? Which is very exciting. And it's a way to help build your confidence and skill set, because nobody's born knowing how to do this stuff. Right? Maybe, I don't know, maybe Mother Jones was, right? But most of us probably aren't born knowing how to be organizers. So it's always good to practice. And then we will talk, we'll do some debrief on those breakout rooms. And then we're going to talk about data tracking, right? What do we do once we've had these conversations to make sure that our organizing efforts are systematic, consistent, and that we are being thorough, right? Because that's a very important step. And then finally, we'll conclude, and I'll talk about what we have for the next and final session, if you can believe it. We're almost to the end of this training and the semester. So let's start with some homework review. I want to just open this up, and feel free to raise your hand. Let me open the participants window here. Feel free to raise your hand and answer the question. How did you go about making this list? Like, what was the process that you engaged in? Because if you recall, the homework assignment was to make a list of faculty in your departments, either by yourself or maybe with the other chapter leaders, and then to think through who among them would be a good activist. So what was that? How was that process for you? Okay, I see Peggy.
Hi there. Is my sound okay?
Great.
Yeah, so I called my colleagues who are the other officers of our chapter, and said we have homework, even though I'm the only one who's attending the organizing school. And what we did is I pulled up a list that I've created. Of all of the members of the faculty in the college, and Sarah Lawrence is a small school, so there's, maybe there's 300 people on the list, some of whom are contingent faculty and some of whom are on tenure contracts. And I was very organized, and they were like, well, what about this person? And they were like talking off the tops of their heads, but it was actually fine, right? Because I'm the one who has the list, so I'm happy to be, tracking that. And we talked about some ideas we went through, and they wanted to know who's already a member of AAUP and who's not, who's been at any of the meetings, even if they're not a member or not. So we were sort of systematic and sort of random.
Great. That's awesome. That sounds like a really good, engaging process. And, one thing that we learned doing this is you do have to start with the people you know, right? When you sit down and you say, who would be good, right? And then, well, I have anecdotal experience with this person, or I've seen this person do something. And that's a great place to begin, right? And what it sounds like you were able to do was kind of cycle to have, not to sound too academic here, have a dialectical relationship between both the anecdotal experience and the hard data, where you say, okay, this person sounds good. Here, let's put it in the chart. Let's see, let's make this more systematic. So that sounds awesome. All right, and then I saw also, Beth, I believe you had your hand up.
Hi there. So similarly to Peggy, I put together a list. I actually made a Google Doc of all the departments, and then I'm serving on our executive board. I'm a member at large, and I'm new to that group. So one of my colleagues was really involved in doing organizing and who had been doing a lot of one-on-one conversations, she had a list. So she and I met and we tried to fill in what we could, and then at our next exec meeting, we had a very similar conversation to what Peggy described. And we're large public universities, so there's about 50, 60, 55 departments or so. So it's a little bit more challenging. And what really became apparent was how much work we have to do to try to set this up. But I think we all recognize the value of it, and trying to pick up the pieces from the pandemic to try to, continue this work to recruit people.
Yeah, great. So what you bring up a really excellent point, which is really step one, or maybe step 0.5 of any kind of organizing work, is putting together the list itself, right? That is not easy sometimes. Some of you might come from very small liberal arts schools where you have 100 faculty, so it's a little more straightforward. But some of you might come from massive state schools. For example, I'm working with a chapter in Minnesota, and they have 5,000 faculty. So to actually create a list took like 4 weeks of a team of activist faculty just to put that together. Right? But that is so essential and will pay dividends down the road, because what you don't want to do is rely on your administration to provide you a list, which as an advocacy chapter, you don't have a legal right to have, right? Union chapters do. They can ask the employer, who are the people in our bargaining unit, right? And they're required to give you a list. Whether that list is accurate is up in the air, but we have to do it like the old-fashioned scrappy way. So that sounds like you were effective at doing that, and you realize like this is going to be a project, but it's a clear project, right? It gives you your somewhere to start. So that's awesome. I see Alice Polly.
I will not take too much time, but I wanted to sort of say we did it as part of our every 2-week executive committee meeting. And we essentially gave it 15 minutes and said, for each person, including the grad student, go to your department webpage and just type into our shared Google Doc first name, last name, email address. And then we had categories of potential member, current member, potential activist, current activist, right? So like where could somebody be bucketed? Like they're not a member now, but they might be if we asked, or they are a member, but they're not an activist. Like how could we grow them into that? And so on. And potential org leader, current leader, and red flags. My colleagues, the two things I wanted to add was my colleagues wrote down the people they thought were reasonable prospects to start with, but I wrote down everybody and then looked at them and said, is this person, like I made a decision, is this person a yes or a no, as opposed to them where they were like, I've already identified some people. Even though we did it that way, and therefore there were a whole bunch of people who didn't cross their minds, they were still like, they left that conversation going, after 15 minutes, we have a list and I need to go have some conversations with people. So it didn't take us that long to have something. I mean, it's Purdue, it's like we have 2,000 faculty. Like I can imagine getting a list of everybody would take forever, but I can also imagine doing this as part of our chapter meeting where we're just going to take 15 minutes. Here's the list, put a bunch of names down, and that's a step farther than we were before, because we kept trying to spend time figuring out Parse Hub and scraping, email addresses from the website, and that's such a high lift that we're just like, I don't even know. Yeah. So it was pretty, I think, galvanizing for our group. It was only 15 minutes, and look, we have a bunch of names now.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's really awesome. And you're right that it can be a fun thing to do. It's not particularly exciting work, right? It's just data entry, but that can be something that you're all kind of have some mild suffering together, and at the end of it you have a really useful product. So actually, Alice, I want to stay on you if I can, and I want to ask, you don't have to name names, but you referenced you made some judgment calls, right, about who do you think would be a good person to reach out to, who might make a good leader activist. I'm interested in hearing your process. How did you go about doing that?
So, I mean, literally the way we did it was everybody thought in their brain, but I think you're asking like about their own units, right? We didn't have a conversation about it because we don't know who all the people are, but I think you're asking like in my brain, when I'm looking at my people, how did I bucket them? Yes, is that what you're asking?
Yes. Like how did you draw distinctions?
Well, I already have like 5 people in my department who are members. So, I'd sort of forgotten that. But then I went through each one and I thought about how people participate in faculty meetings. I wanted to remember our contingent faculty. And I thought, how do they approach the sort of philosophy of AEUP? When I bring this stuff up about shared governance, and I'm the chapter president and I am at our Senate, right? And I am my department senator. And so the line is blurry about, which is AEP business and which is Senate business. But I bring up issues of shared governance and academic freedom in our department head meeting or department meetings. And I think, like, how do people react when I do that? Do they roll their eyes? There are some people who roll their eyes. I'm like, no, I will not ask them to be members. I also thought about, the dues are $280, and we have chapter dues, which are an additional $40. And I thought, who are the people who would see that as a worthwhile, essentially a donation? Like, I don't think they would think about it as membership per se, but to just start with, who would give that kind of money towards something that is as vague as academic freedom and shared governance? There are some people who I think would, and other people who are like, I can barely make my, my fees for my professional society. I think I also thought there was some about political persuasion, like how likely I thought that they were sympathetic to unions and to the idea of organizing, and whether they thought academia was about, at least in part, about labor. And so I thought about those. I also thought about who actually, when they say they're going to do something, do they do it? Right. And so a bunch of those, I mean, most of what I committed to were the people who are current members. That was one thing, but then there were a couple. I have like 4 potential members, 2 of whom I think, like 2 activists out of that group that might be sort of movable. But yeah, so anyway.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I think the one of the last things you said there is a key point. Who is already doing work, right? Who are the faculty that are already stepping up and have done things that, you know, may not be organizing, but are at least, you know, tangential to organizing? Who says things during faculty meetings? Who comes to the Senate? Who's willing to speak truth to power? Those are all important considerations. And a number of other things you mentioned too, right, are things like, you know, who's sympathetic? And of course, that's a subjective call you make. And part of what we need to do, and we're going to talk about today, is how do you confirm that suspicion, right, by talking to someone. All right, Anne, and then we're going to move ahead.
Hi, sorry, I don't need to take up time if we should just go ahead. That's fine.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, our situation in our chapter is a little different because we have seven institutions that we're serving with one chapter. We're a consortium. So each of the executive committee representatives from each institution was tasked with finding the list of people at their college, because those people have a better network. And for my part at Scripps, the second person on the EC has been at Scripps for something like 20 years longer than I have. So that's 30 years. And so he really knows the ins and outs of everybody's commitments and what they will and won't do. So I definitely worked with him to, initially asked him just to compile a list by department, like one person per department. And then I kind of threw together my, as was said before, we have a pretty small college, so you can just go through every single person who works at the university or at the college rather, and so that's what we did. And then I think we're still at the point where we're kind of, wondering if all the people we all came up with are actually people who are going to get stuff done. The other way that I identified people was not just based on their politics, but also based on if they have responded to one of the memos we've already put out with a lot of feedback. Because it seems like that if it means a lot to them, enough for them to write us a kind of 2-3 paragraph feedback about our letter, then they probably are willing to do more. And they just need to be asked. So that's, I don't know. And Deborah also is in the consortium. Maybe she has ideas, but.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like you're doing exactly the right thing. And one thing we'll talk about today, and we'll go into even more detail in the final session on issue campaigns, we're going to talk about tactics, is ask yourself, do we have records of when somebody participated? And one record of that is they are responding to chapter messages and they're being active in that way. Another kind of record might be, did they come to a meeting? Which is why you want to have sign-in sheets, for example, at meetings, right? And those are things you can go back to as leads for who you can recruit. So it sounds like you all were pretty successful in building lists, and you had different approaches, different challenge levels, but I'm really excited to hear that you dove into it with gusto, because that is really the bedrock of how to start with this work. And what we're going to be talking about today is, what do we now do with this list? Once we've identified people who we think might be solid members, potentially activists or even leaders, how do we recruit them? How do we bring them into the chapter? How do we activate them? And that's the skill we're really going to be focusing on today. So let's talk about organizing conversations. And I'm going to talk about what these are, and then I'm going to pass it over to Sean to give you some arguments as to why you would want to do them, if you're not already convinced. So what is an organizing conversation? Well, to put it simply, actually, first I want to say, the reason we do this, the reason why in organizing we emphasize person-to-person contact, is because it works, okay? Email is great, right? Texting, great. Having a casual conversations with people as you pass them in the hallway, that's great. Those are all things you should do. But what those aren't is organizing, okay? Because an email is one way, it's passive. Having a casual conversation with somebody at work, that's good, but it's not really organizing in the sense we're going to talk about it today. And so the most effective way to recruit someone to your chapter, to change their mind, or to move them to some position, or to get them to take action, is to talk to them face to face. If you don't take my word for it, there's tons of sociological research on this. If that doesn't convince you, ask yourself, why do presidential campaigns or political campaigns spend millions and now billions of dollars on door-to-door canvassing to get votes? It's because it works, right? They wouldn't do that if it was a waste of time. So what an organizing conversation ultimately boils down to, and we're going to like really complicate this, but what I want you to keep in the fore of your mind is all we're talking about ultimately is a personal interaction in which you build a relationship with a colleague of yours. Okay, think back to the first training we had about the definition of organizing. Organizing is building relationships between similarly situated people and turning those relationships into collective power. This is how you build those relationships, is by talking to people. I know, shocking, right? That's how you do it. So in an organizing conversation, again, I'm summarizing here, and Sean and I in a moment are going to really add a lot of complications and detail to this. So I want you to keep this, see the forest for the trees as we go through this. An organizing conversation is a process by which you get to know your colleagues' problems. What things do they care about? What things are causing them to suffer? Right? What things are really issues for them in their work life, or even their, potentially their personal life. And then you inspire them to take action to fix that problem. And ideally, that action is through your chapter. And it's a collective action, right? It's not just something they do on their own, or the chapter leaders do. Okay. So as I just mentioned, right, the definition of organizing, this is how we build relationships and turn them into collective power, is we talk to colleagues, we hear about their problems, we build a relationship, and then we ask them to take actions to solve the problems that they care about alongside us. So that might sound well and good, but what really makes it different from just a conversation, right? Because sometimes when I do a training with a chapter and I say, we're going to learn how to have conversations, they give me a strange look. They're like, what do you mean we're going to have conversations? We know how to have conversations, right? Well, you don't know how to have an organizing conversation unless you've been trained in this before. Because what makes it different from a chat is that you go into the conversation having what's called an ask. You are here to get this colleague to do something. Now, the ask is simply some action that we want our colleague to commit or not to take. Okay. Now, this can be a number of things. The most obvious would be join the chapter, right? I'm sure I've asked colleagues in the past to do this. I'm sure many of you were, when you first came to the chapter, it wasn't because, maybe for some of you it was, but for most of you, my guess is, it's not because you were struck by lightning and felt a moral compulsion to join the chapter that you couldn't explain. It's because somebody came to you and talked about AAUP and said, will you join the chapter? Will you join us? Right? So that's one common ask. An ask might be signing a petition, filling out a survey, coming to a meeting, writing an op-ed, calling your legislator, attending a rally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Some action we want a colleague to take. And these are things that we often simply do by email in our chapters, right? Hey, everybody, we're having a meeting. Can you come? That's good. We want to do that. But of course, if we really want people to commit and boost turnout and interest, we want to talk to them and ask them. Now, those might sound very daunting. Oh my God, I have to start talking to people and asking them to do things. That's very scary, right? Rest assured, it is a little scary, but also there is a model for these conversations that's tried and true, which we're going to get to in the next section. And this will give you some scaffolding to help structure having these conversations. It's not to dictate, it's not supposed to be robotic, right? But there is a way to approach this that's systematic, methodical, and strategic that will help you build your chapter. So now I'm going to pass over to Sean, who's going to walk us through some bad reasons not to do these things.
Yeah, so kind of like what Mike said, I am sure that if you are here, you're here because you want to build your chapter. But just for reiteration and to kind of repeat some bad reasons not to do one-on-ones. We have so much work to do already. Adding them is too much. That's understandable. We're just not good at it. Faculty are introverted. Hear that one a lot. Playing into the awkward academic stereotype. We don't have anything about this department. We don't know anything about this department, or this department is very anti-AUP. We don't have any members in the department who can talk to them. Or we send emails and newsletters already. Based on the slide, you know that these are bad reasons, but now we're going to go into, briefly why these are bad reasons. Once again, one-on-ones are the way are how you recruit activists to share the load. It's very easy to kind of get into this rut that there's so many things to do, and distributing work can be tough. But one-on-ones are how you can bring people in to build your chapter and to make it so that you don't have the cycle of burnout where you're trying to do everything instead of bringing more people in to do the work that they also care about. Once again, no one's good at this in the beginning. It's very it's not a chat, and so it takes intentionality, and it also takes practice, which is why we're here and why it's good to just try. We all have weird conversations sometimes, but that's why we practice, and you just keep working at these skills. Just because you think if you don't know a department, that's an even better reason to go to the department and talk with folks in it. Additionally, if you think a department is anti-AEP, we need to confirm this bias. I think it's very easy to kind of brush off certain departments or schools or colleges, but you need to confirm that and to just ask. A lot of people aren't members because they never were asked. Once again, it's very easy to kind of avoid a department if no one's, a member in there, but kind of based off the logic of number 3, if no one's has never been asked, they're not going to automatically become members. There's a few people who will, but a vast majority aren't. And that's why it's better to go out and ask and to learn more about your colleagues and to better know them. Lastly, emails and newsletters are great, but they're only one way in the toolbox. And once again, a one-on-one conversation is the best way to connect and to hear about people's issues and to work with them to better your chapter and institution. So there are definitely more good reasons to do this than bad reasons. So let's go into them. You have low 10 good reasons to do one-on-ones. You have low membership density. You want to build more members. Going out and asking is the way you're going to build more membership and member density. You have high membership density. This is a great way to get people involved. Many hands make light work, and having people, take on that work gives them, more ownership and makes them feel more involved in their chapter. And this is a great way to get out and make sure that you have a tap on what's going on your campus. You're in the middle of a campaign and want to update your members. Once again, this is how you update people. Some people check emails, newsletters, Facebook, whatever, but the best way to make sure people are involved and engaged and have their answers questioned is to talk to them. You're between campaigns, and you want members to pay attention to important issues, hear their concerns, and discuss issues for the next one. Once again, organizing is, a reiterative process, it's ongoing. And part of that is, checking in with people from time to time and making sure that, their issues and needs are heard. You don't have many activists and you want to recruit them. Once again, making sure that, you can build your member capacity and your activist capacity. Or an organizing conversation is one way to do that. You have lots of activists and you want to put them to good use and make them visible. I think that kind of ties in with a lot of the other ones. You have an event meeting and want to turn out members. Once again, an email is a great way to get it on people's minds, but faculty are often very busy people spinning lots of plates. One way to help them prioritize this is to talk to them and talk to them about why coming to these meetings or events is important. You want to have an event and meeting and need to buy in from members to do it. Kind of like the previous one. You want to know what members are thinking and their concerns. Once again, you can generally, I think people have a sense of what's going on in their institutions, but it can differ from college to college, department from department, and having those conversations really helps you to understand what's going on. And you want members to know what your chapter is thinking. what the chapter is thinking, why everyone needs to help to be successful. Yeah, I think it's easy to kind of sometimes get into that frame of mind where you look off and, you know, your chapter is something separate, but when you have colleagues, your colleagues are coming to you talking about why this is important, it really helps shift people's vision of what it is, and you know how when you all work together, you can better your institutions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sean. So as Sean's slides there clearly make the argument, there is never a good reason not to do one-on-ones, right? Whether your chapter is really active and successful, whether your chapter is brand new, whether you have 2 members or 500 members, right? There's always a benefit to talking to your colleagues. Okay. So let's talk about how to actually do that. Right. Sean and I are now going to walk through a 7-step model. Now, again, as I mentioned previously, I want to say up front, the goal of this is not to make you into robots who are following a script. The goal of this is to help give you some confidence and to give you some scaffolding for a process by which a conversation with a colleague, an organizing conversation, can be most successful. Okay. And this it'll become clear what really makes it different from just a chat or a casual conversation. It's because there's a model, right? There's something we want to get out of this conversation. So a basic organizing conversation has 7 steps, and I'm going to just touch on them here, just name them, and then we're going to go into detail about each one. Well, the first step is an introduction. Who are you, and why are you in my office, or why are you trying to set up a Zoom call with me? Right? You want to answer those questions. You then go into the issues discovery phase, which anybody here who maybe has a background in law, discovery here is related to that meaning. You are trying to identify the problems this faculty member faces. What do they care about? You then go into the next step, agitation, right? It's like a washing machine, right? It's the next stage in the cycle. And agitation is you help this person figure out, well, who's to blame for this problem that they're facing? Because I guarantee you, there is somebody out there on your campus who could make a different decision if they wanted to that would fix the problem. Or maybe they're outside of your campus. Maybe it's your state legislature or something, right? But there is some person or persons who, if they only change their mind, could do something to improve the lives of faculty. And that's something we're going to go into a lot of detail next time around in issue campaigns, but this is an important piece of a one-on-one. You then give them a vision or hope, right? You don't just want to walk in and get people all riled up. Okay? You want to actually take that energy and channel it in a productive direction. So you talk about how can we fix this problem? You get them thinking about collective action. And then finally, at step 5 of this conversation, do you actually get to the ask? It's only once you've been talking to this person for 10, 15, 30 minutes, an hour, by the time you actually get to the ask. And this is the action you are asking them to take to fix the problem. You then go into the inoculation step, which is where you discuss what the administration's likely to say about this action. You preempt that. Again, we're going to talk a lot about this in a moment. And then finally, a follow-up or a plan. This isn't always necessary, but it often is, right? If they agree to do something, if you're going to meet with them again, if there's any kind of follow-up necessary. So this is the basic flow of an organizing conversation. Introduce yourself, figure out what a person cares about, identify who's to blame for that problem, think about ways we could fix it, ways we could come together, and then ask them to do something specific as a first step to fixing that problem, which could be as simple as coming to a meeting, right? Doesn't have to, you're not going to ask them, can you single-handedly fix everything, right? It's all about collective action. Okay, so let's go into each of these steps in detail. The introduction. You would think it's relatively straightforward, and in some ways it is. You would be surprised how often people forget this step, which is to introduce yourself. You want to say who you are and why it is you want to speak to this person. Okay, in general terms. Right? You don't want to come in and say, I need you to sign this petition right now, because that's the ask. We don't get to that yet, right? But you want to say things like, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk with me about the budget cuts? Okay. And this could be by email in COVID land where you're setting up a Zoom or a phone call with somebody. It could also be in person, which hopefully will be, more and more once it's safe this coming academic year when you're knocking on somebody's office door. I'm here to talk about what your AAUP chapter is doing. Do you have a minute to talk? So here you're announcing I'm doing something on with my chapter hat on. And so they know, okay, this is an AAUP thing. I wanted to make sure I spoke with you about a survey on faculty issues. So this is an example. If your chapter, say, puts together a survey, this is how you might introduce that to people. Hey, I'm here to talk to you about this survey. Or I'm trying to speak with everyone in this department about the board's latest policy. I'm sure you all have a board's latest policy that you can think of that faculty might be interested in talking about, right? So this is a good way to introduce a conversation, even by email. Hi, I'm Mike. I've seen you at a Senate meeting before. I wanted to set up a call to talk about the board's latest policy. Can you let me know if you have 20 minutes next week to talk, right? That could be a good introduction. So that's step one. You want to introduce yourself, say who you are, and in general terms, what it is you're doing there. Because nothing is going to break your rapport faster than if you just walk into somebody's office or send them an email that's very vague or non-specific, right? People have limited time. They don't want their time to be wasted. You want to be clear and honest upfront.
So next up is issues discovery. This is where you start your conversation and get into what issues the person you're talking with, your colleague, has. This is the time to listen. Ask open-ended questions to find out what this faculty member cares about and to identify the problems they face. It's important to spend most of your time here. It can be very easy to kind of blow past this, especially if maybe you come in with there's a big thing on campus, and that could be an issue, but you really want to dig down. You want to be curious about your colleague. It's an organizing conversation, so it has structure, but ultimately it's a conversation. You want to be curious and open about what's been going on in their lives, how, what workplace issues they affect them, how are things going? It's a time to listen. It's a time to be, ultimately to be a curious person, curious about them. So that could look like, oftentimes it can be, an issues discovery can be about asking them about how their term has been going. So, about tell me about how you're teaching assignments this term. What are some challenges you're facing? So trying to get them to open up about that. If there's something that's going on, how does administration's reopening plan affect you and your family? Yeah, just if there's a big thing going on, it's good to ask them about that as well. Additionally, if they're kind of being a little, another way to get about that is to ask them, if there's things that they like, or if there's things that they could change, what would it be? To get them thinking, and that can also tie well into agitation. And then, yeah, what do you think about the administration's realignment plan? So the general goal is to be open-ended, to encourage them to kind of start thinking about the workplace and to what's affecting them, what's not, what do they like, what don't they like, ultimately open-ended, curious questions. And so we're going to try and do something where, would anyone like to try and give an example of a question or an issues discovery question that, they could try on their colleagues? Alice.
I did this week. Our administration is proposing a J term, a January term, by shortening the 15-week, we currently have 16-week fall and spring terms. They're proposing shrinking them to 15 weeks, moving the spring term later, and sticking in a 4-week term, charging same tuition for the fall and spring terms and being able to charge tuition for a J term. And I emailed all of my, the Senate, so it's coming to a vote on the Senate on Monday, a vague proposal. I emailed all of my Senate colleagues in the College of Engineering, and I asked them, how are your constituents responding to the idea of J term, with the idea that ultimately I wanted us to speak together as the College of Engineering at Purdue at the Senate, which could either push through or kill a J term proposal. So I did this week with that question.
Awesome. Yeah. it's important to ask your colleagues, yeah, because these things affect them. Often, yeah, these wide-ranging issues and policies that can sometimes come top down, affect them, and just asking them can be, like, one, they appreciate, getting feedback, but also shows that, your chapter, their colleagues care about what's going on with them.
Okay, great. So once you've spent a pretty substantial portion of time asking open-ended questions, one thing I want to point out, oftentimes when folks are first trained on this, they have a sensation that, like, isn't this like a sales pitch? And it's not, for a couple of reasons, primarily of which is you're not trying to sell anybody anything. You're trying to build solidarity. But second, I think a more useful metaphor is it's more like speed dating. You sit down with someone, you're getting to know them, you're getting to ask them questions in a short amount of time to build some kind of relationship that hopefully will, blossom into something more, right, with the chapter. I don't want to, push that metaphor too much. So once you've spent time getting to know somebody, hearing about the things they care about, what their priorities are, you then move into agitation. And this can be hard when you're first starting out because it can often feel like, kind of like negative vibes, right? But it's important because what you've done already is identified what this person cares about. The next step is figuring out who's to blame for that problem. Usually it's not the chapter. I suppose sometimes it might be, and that's a different kind of conversation. But generally speaking, it's going to be some external person that has power over the faculty. So once you've uncovered their issue, it's time to explore them further, dive deep into this issue that they've identified. You give the person a chance to express their frustration. That's important. And then you help them identify, like, why is this occurring in the first place? Who is to blame for this problem? So again, you continue asking open-ended questions, such as, why don't you think the faculty are playing a real role in the process? Now note here, this is not a leading question. You are not saying, isn't it the case that President so-and-so is a huge jerk and is blocking the faculty from participating? You ask them, why don't you think the faculty are participating, assuming that was an issue they cared about? How do you think the college got into this financial trouble? Again, you're not leading them by the nose. You're not saying the administration's horrible at managing the budget. You're asking them, why do you think we got in this place? What kind of impact do you think these cuts will have on students? Right? I know many of you, I'm certain of it, are facing realignment plans, program cuts, program consolidations in the wake of COVID. So a question you might ask a colleague is, how is this going to affect students? And one of my favorites to ask somebody, why don't you think the administration has done anything to resolve X problem? Now note, X problem here is the problem they identified in the previous step of the conversation. Okay. You want to follow their lead. If they really care about, say, childcare access on campus, don't all of a sudden say, why don't you think the administration is doing anything to resolve intellectual property rights limitations or something, right? You want to follow them, ask them, because they clearly care about childcare. Dive deep into that. Why don't you think the administration is doing more to help parents, for example? So I'm going to do what Sean just did. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to take a stab at an open-ended agitation question? You can feel free to invent the issue, right? Actually, maybe it'll be helpful. I'll invent the issue for you. Let's say the issue, let's do intellectual property rights. That's a big hot button issue with COVID, right? People with online teaching. Let's say you're talking to somebody and they've said, I'm really concerned that the administration is going to take my course materials and use it down the line without my permission. So what might be a question you would use to agitate around that concern? Let me just look at the, Peggy, please.
Maybe just something as simple as, are you concerned about the way that your work may be used without your agreement or consent by the college?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. One thing I'll point out is that that's a yes or no framing of that question. Are you concerned, right? That's an easy way for them to say, well, of course I'm concerned. a way, so what might be a way to frame that that's not yes or no?
What do you think about the possibility that the college may have this opportunity to use your work without your specific consent?
Mm-hmm. Great, good, yeah. So what do you think about that? How does that make you feel, right? What concerns does that raise for you? Those are all really great ways to frame this. Another way to put it, if you want to really kind of like put a needle in the issue, is say, why do you think the administration is doing this? Like, what do they have to gain from this, right? Might be a question. Damien, yeah, do you have another question?
Yeah, why, what should we do? Let's see. I did, and then I put myself on camera, and then there it went. What should we do to prevent the administration from taking away our retirement further, and further cracking down on, you know, our insurance and all of this?
Yeah,
what should
great.
we do? Should we just, you know, lay back and take it?
Yeah, exactly. What should we do? What can we do? And in fact, Damien, you are my segue machine, because that leads exactly into the next point of the conversation, which is vision, hope, collective action, which I'll let Sean guide through.
Yeah. So, you know, throughout this conversation, you're doing a lot of listening. You know, you're asking open-ended questions, you're being curious about your colleague. But vision and hope is kind of where you kind of get back into the conversation a bit. You know, you're not, you know, just talking at the person, but this is more of a dialogue at this point. So through questions and brainstorming, you help them realize what must be done to fix the problems they identified, while giving them information about why collective action is the answer. So this is Damien's question is a really good one about kind of brainstorming about what can we do, instead of, you know, leaving people like, yeah, this really sucks, or, you know, this is a huge issue on campus, and, you know, like, it's affecting how I teach and do my research and interface with students. This is where, you know, you kind of show them that there's another option. Like, we just don't have to sit down and take this. We can work together to improve our institution. So some of these examples could be, how do you think other faculty feel about this? Reminding them that, you know, they're not alone. Like, there's other people on this campus that probably feel the same way that you do, and they're sick and tired of you know, dealing with this. What do you think it would take to get administration to change course on this policy? So thinking, you know, helping people think like changes can be made. The status quo is not set in stone, and together we can make these changes. What if we work with students to bring this to the attention of the administration? Oftentimes, these issues that you face as faculty, you know, affect your work, which affects, you know, students, or, you know, in other ways affects students and other groups on campus. So thinking about how can we bring other people in to bring this issue up? What kind of message would it send if faculty were publicly united against this? Helping people envision the power that you all have. You know, you're a major part of your institutions, and you hold power, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like it, because it can be very siloed at sometimes. You all have power, and it's about, you know, helping people see that hope and vision. So Damien gave a good example, but does anyone else want to take a stab at, you know, asking one of these vision or hope questions?
I can give another one if you'd like. How can we empower ourselves using these feelings of agitation that we have? You know, how can we empower ourselves so that the administration pays attention, that we, you know, get into the next step? I know that at least in my institution, there is, well, there is some reluctance to look at AAUP as anything other than sort of a subversive, clandestine group out there that seems to be anti-institution, you know. And how can, you know, this is not something that we would say to faculty, many of them believe that, but, you know, just the question, do you feel as though the institution generally empowers you to, with regard to things such as retirement? You know, that you kind of beg the question. You know, do you like it when administration abuses you? Right? No, of course not. Well, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I think like talking about, you know, like what can we do? Like how can we get the administration to pay attention is a great way to kind of like frame that, to be like, yeah, like, you know, they're not considering our needs. Like how do we make them see that this is an important issue? Alice?
We can come back to my J-term example. When I called my senator colleagues, emailed my senator colleagues and said, what are you hearing from your constituents about J-term? Lots of them came back and said, I think this is a done deal. Like, I don't think that we're going to be able to do anything about that. It makes no difference what we think. And I replied to the group, like people would send that to me individually, which was fascinating, is like what people send to the group and what people just send to me. But I wrote back and I said, you know, it sounds like there are lots of people who have lots of concerns. I wonder what you think about working together. This is going to be a meeting with not much time for people to make comments, but if we spoke together as the College of Engineering, I think that would be really significant at a place like Purdue, where the president keeps saying, you know, our science and technology focused campus. If engineering spoke up and said they're against J-term, that would be hard for the administration to go over. So like, could we speak together is what I was trying to say, not leading them into the no, which at that point I wasn't sure about. And they were like, oh, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, just having that, you know, saying, what can we do together is a great way. We're reaching an hour, so Peggy, and then we
Just to say that on a couple of matters over the last year, I kept hearing the phrase, well, that horse has left the barn, that horse has left the barn. And finally, I started thinking about that and said, but you know, horses always come back to the barn. It's actually very, very rare that a horse doesn't return to the barn. So a conversation doesn't have to be over if we don't want it to be over.
definitely. Well,
I have a question though, and how do we overcome what I suppose a psychologist would call feelings of learned helplessness?
well, you are really good at segues.
Right.
That'll be coming up. That'll be coming up soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we'll actually give you some very specific, concrete ways to navigate that.
So the check's in the mail then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you, Dave. Yeah, he's our plant in the audience. All right. So what you've done so far in the conversation, you've introduced yourself, you've identified what this person cares about, you have helped them see what the real underlying problem is causing that suffering, and then you've had them start thinking about what are some ways we could fix this? Can we change the status quo and how? It's only now that you get to the ask. Here's the thing I want you to do. And this is really what sets an organizing conversation apart from just a gripe session. Because what you've done so far could just be a gripe session. Oh my God, this horrible thing is happening. Doesn't it suck? Yeah, it sucks. The president's a jerk. We should do something about it. If the conversation just ended there, you haven't actually done much. Okay. So the thing that really sets it apart is the ask. You ask your colleague to commit to taking action. And you always walk into a conversation having an ask. It might change over the course of the conversation, right? You might have something else you want to ask them instead. But you always want to walk in knowing, I am here to get this person to sign a petition, join the chapter, etc. So here are some ways you can frame an ask. And again, just like agitation and also with hope, this is challenging. It's especially challenging, I think, because of the culture of academia encourages us to be, very collegial. We don't want to put pressure on anybody. We just want to, ask questions and have endless dialogue, right? As a good in itself, which of course it is when you're pursuing truth. When we're trying to organize somebody, you want to make a clear ask of them. So what you might say is the first step towards solving this problem with J terms is to determine how widespread the problem is or how many faculty really care about this issue. Can you do a survey that will help us see how widespread concern over this problem is? Maybe that's a bad example of this, right? But you can imagine, childcare, retirement benefits, pay, intellectual property rights, right? If that's the issue this person cared about and you're here to get them to do a survey, you could frame it this way. If you're here to get them to join the chapter, one of the harder asks, right? I think we agree that this problem isn't going to fix itself if you've done, you went through the vision step. Will you join your, note the language there, your AAUP chapter and stand with your colleagues against this? An important point here is that, and it's hard, you never want a third party to the chapter. It's not the chapter or a chapter. It's our chapter. It's your chapter. Because the administration is going to drive that wedge whether you do it or not. They're going to say the chapter is somehow separate from faculty, which no, our metaphysical position is that the chapter is the faculty, right? They're inseparable. The chapter is merely the faculty coming together. If you want this person to talk to somebody else, I notice you have a new colleague. Could you share this petition with them? If you have a petition, for example. We need your input on our campaign. Will you come to our organizing committee meeting next week? Right, that's if you want them to come to a meeting. So note, all of these are direct, they're clear, and they make space for a yes or a no answer. In contrast to the previous steps of the conversation where you're asking open-ended questions, when you get to the ask, you want a close-ended question. You want a yes or a no. It is okay if they say no. Rejection is fine, right? Again, go back to the speed dating example, right? It's okay if they say no. Don't take it personally, right? But you want to know if they will say no or if they say yes. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to do some ask framing, but you'll have a chance in the role play in a moment here. So once you've made the ask, you get an answer, okay? If they squiggle and they're squirmy and they won't give you an answer, right? There are ways to push to get an answer because you want to walk away from a conversation knowing, is this person ready to step up and commit to taking an action, whatever it is.
So ideally, let's say the conversation went well and the person, or not well, but the person said yes to your ask. You kind of move on to the next step, which is inoculation. It may seem, like it says, it may seem a little silly or weird, but it's important to inoculate the person you're talking with, you're organizing, with weak arguments against your position or against taking action. This will bolster their immune system against stronger attacks from the administration. So there's kind of like multiple reasons, but I'll highlight 2 reasons why inoculation is important. One is that a lot of administration or decision makers pull a lot of the same tactics from the same book. So when you tell people, if you're in an issue campaign or, some other sort of campaign where you're working against kind of trying to change the decision maker's mind, telling people that, this may be coming down the line, that, they're going to send out emails, there may be other things. Telling people that you're doing that, really helps you to show that, one, that you know what you're doing and that, you have their number, that you're all working together and you know what's going to happen. But additionally, it's important to be upfront and explicit about, the expectations. If you're, asking someone to be an activist or to, step up to leadership, talking to them about what the real expectations are going to help them to frame that in their mind. So when, they have to go to a meeting, or if they're, doing this, that, and the other, they're not going to think, wow, Peggy, who's on the top of my screen, Peggy really didn't tell me what was going on. I came into this thinking it was going to be one thing, but it's a whole nother thing. And now I feel really like disillusioned about this process. So inoculating people and telling them what to expect is very powerful, and it's very important for open communication and transparency within your chapter. So you can do this in different ways. For the sake of time, I will not read them, but yeah.
And so then finally, once you've done all that, the last step, which is an optional step, you might not always need it, is the follow-up, right? So if this person agreed to do something, make a plan to follow up with them. So let's say they said they were going to do the survey, right? You have this survey. Say, I'll check in with you tomorrow, see if you have any questions about that link I sent you, and then send them an email. I'll see you next week to see how your conversation with your colleague went. Or what do you need to know to join your chapter? I'll get you that information. If somebody says, I'm really concerned about the dues structure, and you can't get them to say yes or no, say, okay, listen, well, what information would you need? And then they tell you, well, I really want to see what the dues structure is, what the bylaws are, whatever, right? I'll get you that information, and then actually do it. Remember that our organizing meeting is next week on Tuesday. I'll send you a reminder over the weekend. And again, actually do it. Because nothing, again, is going to ruin your legitimacy more than if you don't follow up in the ways you said you would. And it's also a great way to build trust with people when you follow up. So that is the 7-step organizing conversation, okay? You introduce yourself, you figure out what a person cares about, you help them identify why that problem exists, you start thinking about vision and collective action as a solution, you ask them to take a basic first step towards that collective action, and then you follow up as necessary. That's it, right, when you boil it down. But as Damien gestured earlier, people are going to object sometimes, right? Not everybody is going to be an easy ask. Not everybody is going to just say yes to your ask. So what do you do? Well, objections are very common, but they do not necessarily indicate that someone's not willing to join the chapter or take action, because people may have limitless objections. Your job as an organizer is to determine if their objections are sincere and deeply felt, and if they can be changed, if they're willing to change their minds or not. And that's a hard skill to develop, but it's critical. So what are some ways we might respond to objections? Well, one way is the method we call feel, felt, found. And what you do is you say, some version of, I understand how you feel. I've felt that way before too. But what I've found is joining the chapter or taking the action is often the solution. Okay, feel, felt, found. It's a way to express empathy, but also to direct them to maybe feeling more confident. So for example, if the person you're talking to expresses some version of learned fear, right? Well, I just want to keep my head down. I think things will just get better. I don't want to make any waves. You're right. I also feel that the administration intimidates assertive faculty, right? You're agreeing with them and you're recognizing their objection, but you're reframing it in a way. I've often felt that I should just stay in my office and focus on my work because I don't want to get in trouble. What I've found is I actually have real agency and a voice when I join my chapter and step up with my colleagues, and we actually have safety in numbers, right? So that's a way you can use feel, felt, found to respond to that kind of objection. Okay. There's also another method.
Yeah, similarly, there's another method, affirm, answer, redirect. It kind of has that similar same 3-step system. Where first you affirm, you make an expression that you understand or empathize, empathize with the objection. Answer, you give a factual answer that doesn't skirt around the issue. And it's also okay to say you don't know if it's a question or answer you don't have at the moment. And then redirect it. So you redirect it to the issues that they have. So you don't focus necessarily on the objection, you answer it, you answer it as best you can, and then you redirect to the things that they care about instead of the objection that they brought up. So for example, the dues are too much, or how can I pay these dues? You affirm, I understand that X amount of dues a month can be a lot. Answer, but dues help support our organizing efforts, strengthen and grow our chapter, and create a better workplace for faculty. And then you redirect to kind of the ask and the issues that they brought up. We're currently working to push back against these top-down austerity measures that are affecting faculty and pushing our budgets to the brink. What do you think we can do to push back? So you kind of get them back into that vision and brainstorming mode where you're like, we need to do something about these issues instead of objecting.
Okay, so that is a quick summary of some ways you can respond. We could talk about those at length, and you'll have a chance to practice them potentially in a moment. The last thing we're going to cover before we dive into the role play, because we want to give enough time for that, at least 20 minutes, is what do you do after you've had a conversation? Because it's one thing to have a conversation and get an answer from somebody, but if you don't record it, or if you don't do anything with that, it's going to be very hard for you to actually build power and be systematic and methodical. So what I'm going to talk about here are assessments, or you can call them something else, reviews. I know assessment is a dirty word right now among faculty in a lot of places because administrations have these ridiculous metrics they're measuring you by. But in the organizer's lingo, we use often the term assessment. And assessments are a subjective judgment call that you as the organizer make after you have a conversation. And what you're answering is the following question. Based on what my colleague said, what is his, her, or their support for the chapter or the action I ask them to take? Right? Is this person a friend or are they opposed to us? Thinking back to those 10 bad reasons not to do one-on-ones, it might be the case that somebody in a department doesn't like AAUP. You might confirm that assumption, right? But you want to be sure that you have the conversation, confirm that, and then record it. So do y'all remember this bullseye, right? We're going to come back to this. So one-on-one, I remember we talked about like, growing your chapter is about building out those center circles of leaders, activists, and members. Well, one-on-one conversations are the critical piece. They're like the grease that moves colleagues each rung of the circle. So leaders, activists, and members and non-members can each be given a number that we can use to manage our organizing program. Now, we all do research, quantitative or qualitative. This might make you pull your hair out because it is not a scientific measure, right? But bear with me, it's a useful heuristic. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Every faculty member on your campus, after a one-on-one conversation, can be given one of these numbers. And what these numbers mean, it's a way of telling us how much do they support the chapter. If they're a 0, we haven't talked to them yet. Everybody in that list you made should right now be a 0 unless you've had a one-on-one organizing conversation with them. If they're a 4, we're going to start from the bottom up. That means they said no to your ask. And it's unlikely they're ever going to change their mind, right? Whether it was come to a meeting, sign a petition, join the chapter, they said no, and it was clear based on your discussion, they're not going to come around anytime soon. That person is opposed to the chapter. Now note, these are not moral judgments. We're not saying this person's a bad person. We're not saying they did anything wrong. It's just a way for us to manage and track our own data. A 3 is somebody who said no to the ask, right? They said, I'm not ready to do that yet. But based on your conversation and your subjective judgment, they could move over time with more organizing, okay? They weren't opposed, they just were undecided or were maybe leaning no. That's a 3. A 2 is someone who said yes to the ask and they support the chapter. There's somebody who's clearly a friend, they're willing to step up and do a thing, right? They are like kind of like they're the bulk of our chapters, right? They're potential activists. And then a 1 is, I would say all of you right now can call yourselves 1, although you may want to have an organizing conversation first, just to be consistent, because you said yes to the ask and you're ready to take further action. This is somebody who says, of course I'll do the petition. I'll give it to my department. That's like a diamond in the rough and you love seeing that. It happens. That's a 1. Now, the real distinction here is between 3, 4, and 1 and 2. The first cut is, did they say yes or no to my ask? If they said no, they're a 3 or a 4. If they said yes, they're a 1 or a 2. And then, in between those two numbers is kind of fuzzy and subjective sometimes, right? Whew. Okay, that was a lot. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into breakout rooms now. We have, we started a little bit late, so we're at about 1 hour and 8. So we're going to try and do this in about 15 or so minutes. So we might not get through it all, but that's okay. We're going to go into groups with 3 people per group. There's going to be an organizer, an organizee, and an observer. I'm going to post a role play scenario in the chat. Please open it. I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. I'm going to post this in the chat. Please open it. And in your breakout rooms, somebody is going to step up and volunteer to be the organizer. Someone's going to be the faculty member who's being organized. And the third person's merely going to observe. Okay. And your job in these breakout rooms is to make an ask of this person and to think about how would you assess them. All right, I just posted a document in chat. So please take a moment to open it. It should say AC School 3 role play scenarios. All right, don't read it yet. Go into your groups because what you read will depend on what your role is. Okay. All right, does anybody not have it open? Okay. I'm going to assume that means everybody has it open. Maureen, do you have a question?
I'm trying to download it and it's giving me a hard time. Like it just, I can't get it open. Maybe one of my colleagues will have it.
Okay.
I can't get it open.
Okay, so I'm going to create 3 rooms. That means there might be 4 people in a room, but that's okay. So I'm going to create these rooms and prepare thyself to click go. Ready, set, go. So Sean and I will keep these last pieces brief. We don't have a time to do a full debrief. One thing that you will want to do in your chapters when you have these conversations is meet after having the conversation to talk about how it went. Right? You want to ask, what were this person's issues? How would you assess them? What were some challenges? And that is what the organizing committee is for, that we talked about last session. All right. So to wrap things up, let's go to here. And I think somebody needs to mute their mic. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so the last thing, actually, this is Sean. Sean, please take it away.
Yeah, so what do you do with all this information after, you and your colleagues, other leaders and ones on your chapter are talking with all these people? What do you do with all that information? Well, kind of like when you were identifying potential leaders, you want to put it in a chart. So yeah, you want to put it in a chart. It's important to take notes. You put them in the chart. And you want to put them someplace where in a centralized location, whether it be online, a wall chart, or a database, where everyone who's working on this goal can kind of have a centralized location to see this work. You kind of want to have these basic, there will be a document that kind of goes out with this, but you want to make sure you have the basic information: name, department, work email, where they are on campus, and how do you assess them. And you want to make sure that your assessment is, uniform amongst, yourself. So when someone says there are 2, it's because they did a certain action, not because, oh, they're leaning sort of supportive, or they said they support, but they didn't do the ask. So the assessment, once again, is based on the ask, and you want to make sure that you are all clear on making sure that those are uniform and that everyone's on the same page about how to assess people. There's some additional information that's always useful. Who did they last speak with? And any additional notes that, if Maureen, talked with them first time, you can maybe ask Maureen what was going on, if Peggy's going to be the next person to talk with them. So all this information is to help, emphasize that, one, this is a group project. You're talking with all these people, but you're all working together to build your organization to reach a goal. And having that easily accessible, visualized, centralized information helps you all to work towards that goal, to be able to gauge the success of what you're doing, how you're able to reach out to people and create networks. It helps you to identify people that you may never have thought that you knew. So say if Maureen looks at this list and it's like, oh, Kenneth Reno, I know them from some extracurricular non-work activity. I can talk to them. That helps you to map out things that maybe not be so obvious outside of, department or college or school. It also limits the amount of duplicate work, because if, I only see Peggy and Maureen, so that's why I keep naming them. But Peggy and Maureen both know Gloria. Instead of both of them trying to talk to Gloria individually, maybe they volunteer to talk to them together, or one of them will take that task. So these are ways to just make sure that you're all on the same page about the work, that you're reminding yourself and have a visual, like you're working together. And it gives you metrics to make sure that you're moving along and that you're not duplicating the work. And additionally, if you do have those spaces, that it can also show trends among departments and gives future activists a brief sketch of conversations and interactions with the person. So that's kind of a quick and dirty about basic, charting. And there'll be Mike will send out a little one-pager about this as well.
Yeah, and one additional point I want to make is, when people first start organizing conversations, right, there's always like some questions like, isn't this a sales pitch? And another question that often comes up is, isn't this a violation of people's privacy, right? Or some version of that. And what I want to say to that is, first of all, don't put anything in this chart that you wouldn't want, that, use your common sense, that is inappropriate to have on there, right? You don't want, if somebody divulges some personal information to you, don't like go and put it in the notes, right? Only put in the notes things that are relevant to organizing. So here I say, somebody I would mention they're conservative, right? It became clear in a conversation they're conservative. That's important to know when organizing, because when you go talk to that person, if you start spouting leftist propaganda, right, they're probably not going to be very receptive, right? So that's an important thing to know. So that's just something I just want to flag. Okay, whew. Come a long way today. Here's your homework for next time. So remember that list you all made of folks in your departments, potentially in your colleges, maybe you went gung-ho and did your entire university. Your job between now and next session is to schedule one-on-one conversations with the individuals that you thought would be good activists or leaders from that list you made. So at the start of this meeting today, we talked about the folks you identified. Now is your chance to reach out to them. Now that you know how to do this, you can go have an effective conversation. Your ask in that conversation, you can come up with your own ask if you want. I would suggest your ask of these folks would be to form or join your chapter's organizing committee. If you have one already, great, invite them to it. If you don't have one, why not make one, right? Let's have an organizing committee and let's reach out to people that we think would be good activists and say, would you be interested in helping our chapter build power and organize? We don't really know exactly what we're going to be organizing about yet, or maybe you do, maybe you're in the middle of some crisis or campaign. Will you step up and help us? That becomes your ask. If you have people that you think would be good members and they're not members yet, feel free to reach out to them, and where the ask is, become a member, right? Maybe you have a meeting coming up. Maybe there's something else your chapter is doing that you want people to do. You have some action you want them to take. Feel free to also make those asks. But in terms of structured homework, this is it. And when you do this, record in that same spreadsheet their issues. What is their response to the ask? And then give them a 1 to 4 assessment number. Okay. So, behind the curtain here, what I'm trying to do is help you all take some baby steps into methodical, strategic organizing, right? You've identified some possible activists. You now have the skills to talk to them. Your job is now to ask them to step up and participate in your chapter so that down the line, you can mobilize them to recruit more members, to take action, right? So that is your homework for next week. And again, I'll be sending this out in my follow-up. Next session is going to be Friday, May 14th. So a month from now, same time, 3 o'clock to 4:30. And the topic of next session is going to be bringing all of this stuff we've done, right? We started with organizing theory. We then talked about how do you identify activists and recruit them to an organizing committee. Today, we talked about how do you have one-on-one conversations to recruit members and actually build up that organizing committee and build up your membership. Next time, we're going to dive into what's called issue campaigns, which is a way to bring all of this together in an actual coordinated effort to solve some problem on your campus. And I will be joined next time by the Deputy Director of the Department of Organizing and Services, Jim Bakken. Some of you may have encountered him. He's quite the personality. So I don't think you can miss him if you had encountered him. And he will be joining me to talk about that. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I know we went a little bit over. I appreciate you sticking around. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to myself or Sean, and I will see you all in a month.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mike and John.
Have a good one.
Have a good
Thank
weekend,
you,
everybody.
everybody. Good to see you all. Hang in there.
Thank you. Bye.